Welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. Hope everybody had a restful, long weekend. I took a 4-day weekend where I didn't put out a newsletter, didn't do a podcast, didn't do much of anything. And so I suppose I should feel a little bit hungover, but I kind of feel ready. And of course, Tim Miller has been in Hawaii, so he is tanned, ready, and rested. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning, mahalo.
So you're still on Hawaii time.
I am still on Mahali time, so it's going to take me a little bit to get warmed up this morning. So you're going to have to carry us here the first 10 minutes.
Okay, well,
I'll get my juices flowing.
All right, well, I have a rant. I feel it's building inside of me here.
Great.
And of course, there are two schools of thought about political commentary. Actually, there's many more than two, but let's just stay. This is my story. We have two versions, one of which is that it's very important that we deal with the big, important issues, right? And that we deal with substance because we are very serious people. That's school number one. Number two is, second school would be that it's important to point out how incredibly stupid our politics is. And therefore, it's a public service to talk about the stupidity of our politics as well. So I figure it's Monday, right? We're both coming off a long holiday. So let's go with door number two. All right?
Okay, I was going to say, why not choose both? You know, why not a little candy and a little spinach?
We'll work up to this. Okay? All right. So just a little test here. You'll know this. So if you went out to buy like a KitchenAid artisan mixer, how much would that cost roughly? You think? Just
KitchenAid artisan mixer. I don't know. It's artisan, which is the key word there. It's not just a mixer. So if it's artisan, I'm going to say probably $200.
Okay, it's about $350. Okay. So anybody in America that has, I don't know. You know why I wouldn't have got this. See, this is my way of backing into the whole. What is the whole Kamala Harris pot thing about? That she went to Paris. Now, okay, there are legitimate stupid stories. I think it's legitimate to kind of drag her for her Jussie Smollett, where she said, he was the victim of this lynching, and what a great American he is. He turns out that he made the whole thing up. Okay, that's legit. But this whole thing where the Republican Party is tweeting out stuff about the pot she bought in Paris. Okay. So this apparently was broken by the kids at the Washington Free Beacon, because of course all of our politics are now being written by mouth breathing 12-year-olds. But so here's the breathless story. Amid economic turmoil and calls to buy local in the United States, Vice President Kamala Harris dropped nearly $400 for a single pot at a boutique shop in Paris. The Washington Free Beacon has learned. Overseas last week on a 4-day diplomatic trip to mend U.S. relationships with France, Harris stopped at a pricey cookware shop outside the Louvre Museum, where she dropped hundreds of dollars on various kitchen items. The big ticket items in the haul were a $375 serving dish and a $160 frying pan. The Parisian specialty store told the Free Beacon. The vice president rounded out her purchase with various smaller accessories, such as porcelain and an egg dish. Okay, anyway, copper cleaner, various wooden spoons. This is journalism, man. Altogether, Harris spent €526, which amounts to roughly $600 at the current exchange rate. Reporters joined Harris at the store as she browsed, blah, blah, blah. The vice presidential shopping spree came as American stateside suffer from the worst inflation in 3 decades, putting strain on both consumers and small businesses. An American visiting Paris at the same time as Harris said he visited the store as well and was shocked when a store clerk told him what Harris bought, given the economic challenges back home. I was surprised that our vice president was out purchasing boutique pans in Paris, the tourist told the Free Beacon. She proclaimed at a press conference a day earlier that her focus was on the American worker. Okay. Deep breath. This is her own money. Okay, so it's not like she spent. I just want to make this clear. She's in Paris. She buys stuff, and it's like this big, and it is everywhere. It is everywhere on social media that she bought this expensive pan. Tim, it's almost like people forgot the last fucking guy and what he spent money on. We just had a president who spent money on golden toilet seats, who spent $130,000 paying off a porn star, and yet
that was buying American, at least.
It was buying American. It's keeping it real.
I will say this, Charlie. Look, the Free Beacon. That's obviously a trolley thing. I'm of the view that 1,000 flowers should bloom. I don't know that they're adding a whole lot to the civic discourse with that article, but whatever.
Leave the Free Beacon out.
Yeah, the telling thing is that, like, the actual Republican National Committee is pushing this stuff out, and I obviously think that there is this, attempt to otherize her and, make her seem, I'm sure there's a racial element to it, but it's also just as this coastal elite, Tucker Carlson did the segment on her about how she went to high school in Canada. Do you remember this recently? And how, like, she's not really American. She's not American in that sense, right? If you didn't go to high school here, you don't really have the full American experience. So it's part of this broader effort to otherize her.
I understand that you want to, like, elevate this discussion by using words like otherize. Yeah. I just want to know, who gives a shit whether she buys a pot or not? I mean, really, she buys a pot with her own money. Somebody was posting on social media over the weekend that picture of Trump in Trump Tower with Melania and Barron riding the
redneck Versailles.
It's like, okay, because we are really, really concerned about austerity suddenly. Yeah, so prudent. We're just not supposed to buy stuff because we're all sitting here. I'm sorry, Tim. We're just huddled in the corner.
All these assholes.
Bless us, everyone.
All these assholes, by the way, shaking their copper pots for coins out there. We're all, remember, they were all where were they all gathering the last 4 years? By the way, at the Trump Hotel, paying services to the God King, and if you go look at the menu at that lounge. I mean, these people are running up, French pot style prices just for one little happy hour. I mean, they were offering $150 caviars and, those, rock hard steaks for $90 a pop.
But Americans weren't suffering then. Americans were living large. So therefore it's okay. Hey, speaking of Mar-a-Lago, which I want to do, I understand that they're having Veep tryouts down there, that people have to trek down to Mar-a-Lago and kneel on the golden pillow. So tell me about that, because I missed that story this morning.
It's telling. The short of it is that Trump is already thinking about his VPs. Every trigger warning for everybody out there. The next time around, obviously, Mike Pence is out of the mix. What he's looking for is a running mate with unquestioned loyalty, who will embrace the baseless claims that the 2020 election was stolen from him. This story's from my friend Mark Caputo, who's based down there in Miami.
Yeah. It's going to be Candace Owens.
I enjoyed this one.
Or Lauren Boebert.
You're in the right ballpark, I guess. He gave 3 categories of potential running mates: a person of color, a woman, or someone that he trusts. From the first 2 categories, he's already had an interview with Tim Scott, and here's the report from a source. It was a really warm interaction. Scott was appropriately deferential without being gross like some people are. I mean, what are these people doing? I mean, Tim Scott is, if you ask anybody who's a centimeter to the right of us in what they want for the future of the country, like they mentioned Tim Scott. Tim Scott's supposed to be like the normal potential alternative, and he's trekking down to Trump's golf club to bend the knee, to be appropriately deferential, to let these like D- list Goombas give quotes to Politico on background about how supplicating he was. What? For what? Like, he doesn't. If he wants to stay in the Senate, he doesn't need this. Like, nobody's going to primary Tim Scott. You know what I mean? Like, there are always these excuses. It's like, oh, you have to do this for political purposes, right? Like, oh, Tim, you just don't understand how rough it is out there. You haven't worked a Republican primary in 5 years now, and you just got to do this. You got to do this. Tim Scott doesn't have any elections.
Yeah,
he's humiliating himself for what? The possibility of maybe being the VP that gets hanged Tim Scott next time out on the mall. That's what he's humiliating himself for.
Long line signing up for the humiliation, I guess. I wrote about Kevin McCarthy, who, and again, this is kind of an old story, and I'm sorry if you've heard this before, but apparently he called up Marjorie Taylor Greene over the weekend to, kiss up to her because Marjorie Taylor Greene is threatening his dearest ambition of being speaker. She said she went on Matt Gaetz's podcast and said he doesn't have the votes to be speaker unless he, expels Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger and all of those Republicans that voted for the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And look, I'm definitely old enough. I don't know about you, Tim. I'm old enough to remember when a leader of a party, the speaker in waiting, would not have given the time of day to a freshman backbencher, bitching, off in the corner. In fact, would have, slapped her down. But that leader is not Kevin McCarthy, and he's on the phone, assuring Marjorie Taylor Greene that, don't worry, Marjorie, you're still calling the shots around here. And here's my question: so do these guys do all this to get power, right? Isn't that the rationalization? Okay, so they get power, and what is that going to be like? Since you got into power by humiliating yourself, making yourself small, displaying your weaknesses and lack of character whenever asked, what do you think it's going to be like? What would the great legacy of the speakership of Kevin McCarthy be? Because it's like, yes, sir, may I have another one? Because it's going to be a 2-4 year, whatever, spanking at the hands, not just of the former guy, but of every random bigoted crackpot freshman congressman out there that wants to take a whack at him. I don't know. I see this is where we're out of step because I actually think that people ought to have some sort of self-respect.
Yeah, well, you can see where the power is, right? And like the power here is obviously in Marge Taylor Greene, you know, and not in McCarthy. It's not, you're not even getting the power. You're not wielding it. You're still, having to diffuse it out to the craziest members of the party. And with Kevin, there's an interesting quote in one of the stories about this, where or from it's not one of the stories, from Greene's podcast with Matt Gaetz. And boy, I bet that must be a highly rated podcast, Matt Gaetz's podcast. Think about just the Florida State University young Republicans who are listening to that. There must be tens of them. But Marge said on the podcast to Matt that John Katko, this guy isn't even a Republican. This guy, and here's a moment where I'm kind of like, Marjorie Taylor Greene, maybe Marjorie Taylor Greene is right about something. Maybe this is a broken clock moment, and maybe John Katko should wake up, because if Kevin McCarthy has to look, who is Kevin McCarthy serving in that caucus? It's not John Katko. It's Marjorie Taylor Greene, and like they're mad because they lost this vote that Kevin McCarthy had nothing to do with, that Nancy Pelosi put forth, and so they want vengeance. They want to kick John Katko out of the party. I guess I just don't understand why. Eventually one of these guys, one of these days, is just going to say, "Okay, I'll leave then." Right?
I'm done. All right. Since we're on the subject of deplorables, Lauren Boebert, of course, everybody knows this story by now, as caught on tape, joking about Ilhan Omar being a suicide bomber terrorist. That she tells the story. I look to my left and they're in an elevator, and there she is, Ilhan Omar, and I said, "Well, she doesn't have a backpack. We should be fine." So I don't know what Democrats should do about her, but over the weekend, Lauren Boebert apologized. And Marjorie Taylor Greene put out a tweet basically ripping her for apologizing. Never apologize. You should never take the L in this particular word. So Marjorie Taylor Greene she's feeling it, isn't she? She is the enforcer for the deplorable caucus as well as everybody else.
Yeah, I guess Boebert does the tweet because she is what? Worried that she's going to be criticized for other people. And this is, I think, again, where Marjorie Taylor Greene has demonstrated that insane nihilistic worldview is the predominant one, because she knows that you don't have to worry about the idea that anybody with any authority within the Republican Party is going to do anything to you if you make overt racist attacks on other members of Congress, on anyone for that matter. I mean, this is, a feature, not a bug, of what people are looking for in their politicians. I think that Boebert probably just figures, her fans know that this is a wink, wink, nod, nod apology, because she's not changing her behavior in any meaningful sense. And this is just kind of what these folks have wrought, right? That we just have to, that is just acceptable discourse.
If Democrats cannot make these folks the face of the Republican Party and score points with this, then they ought to get into a different line of work. Maybe they ought to sell kitchenware or something. I don't know. So hey, some good news, a little bit of good news while we're in the middle of this. So the anchor for Channel 9 News in Denver is named Kyle Clark.
He's great.
And this is my first trip to the rodeo with him, but he had a monologue on Denver local news about Lauren Boebert. And I wonder how many other local news outlets have held their local officials accountable the way that Kyle Clark did. So here is Denver's Kyle Clark, anchor for Channel 9 News, the local NBC affiliate in Denver, talking about Lauren Boebert.
Representative Lauren Boebert launched an Islamophobic attack against fellow Congresswoman Ilhan Omar on the House floor today, suggesting that the Congresswoman from Minnesota is involved in terrorism, calling her a member of the Jihad Squad, and repeating an unsupported smear that Omar had married her brother.
The Jihad Squad member from Minnesota has paid her husband, and not her brother husband, the other one, over $1 million in campaign funds. This member is allowed on the Foreign Affairs Committee while praising terrorists.
It's time that we acknowledge something that may be obvious by now. We hold Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert to a different standard than every other elected official in Colorado. We hold Congresswoman Boebert to a far lower standard. If we held her to the same standard as every other elected Republican and Democrat in Colorado, we would be here near nightly chronicling the cruel, false, and bigoted things that Boebert says for attention and fundraising. This is not about politics, assuming politics is still about things like taxes, national security, healthcare, jobs, and public lands. This is about us as journalists, recognizing that we'll hold a politician accountable if they say something vile once, but we won't do it if they do it every day. Our double standard is unfair to all the elected officials in Colorado, Republicans and Democrats, who display human decency.
So, Tim, your thoughts?
Yeah. Oh, Kyle's great. Everybody should follow him on Twitter. I've been following him for a while. That's Denver. He's my hometown local news guy. He does an excellent job. I'll say this. This is just what he said. Is giving me deja vu, because it is exactly what you used to say about Donald Trump. And here's the thing: the analogy I used to make is, I guess it was in the 90s. I've kind of given up on hockey. As you grow up and become an adult and have children, you run out of time to do all the sports, right? You got to give some of them away. So I've given the hockey away. But when I was a child and I had no time for anything, I had plenty of time for everything. I watched all the sports. And there was a New Jersey Devils team then that essentially their strategy was, we're going to do basically a penalty level infraction on every play. Right? Like, we're going to hold, we're going to grab, we're going to trip, we're going to hit, and we're going to basically dare the refs to call a penalty on every play. And it's human nature to not, right? It's human nature to just not do that and to try to create some sense of faux balance. And this was the media problem running into Donald Trump. And it's what Kevin just said, is like, he can't do the crazy Lauren Boebert hour every night. And the analogy breaks down in that there's another additional problem for the media members, which is, even if they did do it, the refs in the hockey game could call a penalty every play, and that would have an impact. If Kevin did do that, it would start to lose its impact, right? Like people would stop caring. It'd be like, oh my God, another here's crazy Lauren again, but she's still in there. There's this sense that you can't do anything about it. I know a lot of listeners have this sort of frustration that builds over time. It's like, well, she's still in there. What good is another angry segment about her? And so people like her and Trump use this to their advantage, and they're creating a model for others. When you look at this next wave of people, the Herschel Walkers and the Josh Mandels that are coming in, who are going to take that model and advance it.
Tim, that was a really, really good analogy. I really like that because I think it does illustrate the way people like this break the system. That there's no template for dealing with it. We get exhausted as human beings. How many front page stories can you do about somebody who is lying? And that really does define where we're at right now. And it is broken. And I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I don't think there's an easy answer for doing this other than, talking about the same thing over and over and over again. Okay, so I want to talk about the Omicron. Is that how you pronounce it? Omicron?
I should. I was in Hawaii. I was learning how to pronounce Mauna, and
how'd you do?
Waikoloa. Not well.
Yeah? Okay.
So I forgot to get. I got to get up to speed on my Greek, and I went to all boys high school and was in the closet in college. So I decided that a fraternity was not really. What I was needing at that moment in my life. So I didn't learn my Greek alphabet.
Okay, so we'll get to that in a moment.
Okay.
So Matthew McConaughey is not running for governor in Texas. Interesting, because the actor was polling pretty well against Greg Abbott, which leaves the field pretty much open to Beto O'Rourke, who, of course, everybody knows who Beto is, ran unsuccessfully against Ted Cruz, although raised a ton of money, ran unsuccessfully for president, although raised a ton of money, and is now running for governor of Texas. And I think it's fair to say that, Tim, you are not a huge Beto fan, or how would you describe it?
That's not exactly right. I would say okay. I have kind of a soft spot for Beto, actually, which is why this is painful. This is like delivering bad news to your friend. That's like, man, I just don't think that this life path that you're on is working for you right now. You want to just have a beer with him. I'd like to just have a beer with Beto and be like, you got a lot of skills, man. I just don't think this is the right path for you. So who knows? I've been wrong before. My predictions are not perfect, but I just don't see how somebody who ran to the far left of the national Democratic primary is the best candidate for winning an off-year election in red Texas, particularly in a year that's likely to be good for Republicans, at least better for Republicans than when he last ran, for sure. And so it just doesn't make any sense as a strategic point. And, I wrote about this back in California. The Republicans make the same mistake too. The idea of running a base first candidate, a candidate that's going to rile up the base, that matters. But persuasion also matters. They both matter, right? And in a state where you're in a hole, like I'm forgetting off the top of my head, I think Trump won Texas by 8.
Yeah.
But if you got to gain 8 points, you either have to depress the Trump voters by that much, that's not going to happen in an off year, or you have to turn out more Democrats. Is that really going to happen for Beto over Biden? Maybe a small amount, or you have to win over some people, right? Like those are the only options. It's magical, young people who are excited about Beto aren't going to just appear out of the woodwork. Surely there's been some population change in Texas, but just not enough. That's all in the margins. And so I just don't see how he's the right candidate. McConaughey, say what you want about him, you can imagine him winning over some Trump people, right? You can imagine him bringing in some people who are just completely non-political to the process. I liked in his video, maybe I'm an exception here. I have a soft spot for McConaughey, just like I do for Beto. This is as a geriatric millennial. I think that these guys are probably just right in my wheelhouse. So maybe I'm not representing the broad electorate here, but his first 2 minutes of his message was a concerted effort to speak to Republicans in Texas. And if you're going to win a midterm in Texas, you need to make a concerted effort to speak to Republicans. Beto actually kind of got this the last time. He ran as a progressive, but his language was aimed at talking to swing voters, at getting people comfortable. I have some friends that work in Austin who are professional Republican types. They, not professional Republicans as they work in Republican politics, but like, they work at natural gas companies or whatever. And they liked Beto. And their friend group kind of liked Beto last time. They thought he's a little liberal for them, but the Republicans have gone crazy, and that's fine. Now, as he's moved left, you're losing some of those folks. I think he's in a worse position than he is in last time. I thought that McConaughey was, not the perfect governor, obviously, but I thought he was an interesting effort to break the mold in Texas, which is what Democrats need. And I just, in a state as big as Texas, it's frustrating to me, Charlie. I refuse to believe that there's not one, rich, where is the Glenn Youngkin of Texas, right? Who is a Democrat? Like, there's not one rich kind of somebody with conservative disposition, maybe somebody who owns some guns, somebody who speaks with a Southern accent, who can go out there and say, you don't have to be scared of me, but I'm not crazy like these assholes that want to have bounties on women that don't, that are going to fly to Cancun during a energy emergency, and go through all, and there's a whole darn long hit list of really outside the mainstream far right agenda that has been pushed by Patrick and Abbott. Find somebody who can make that case, make it be about them. A race about Beto is going to be about Beto, and I just think that's a loser.
Yeah, see, that's what's important. Well, again, leaving Beto aside just for a moment, there's also this phenomenon of the out-of-state money, where certain people become superstars in the party, and they will raise money from every place other than the state they're actually running in. And there's a disconnect between how they play in the state and how they play, say, in Hollywood. So one of the concerns about somebody like Beto O'Rourke is that he's going to suck a huge amount of national money out of races that might actually be competitive. There's kind of a delusion among some of these folks, and there are, we've had this in Wisconsin as well. I think there's going to be a lot of out-of-state money for our Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes, who's running against Ron Johnson, if Ron Johnson runs for re-election. And I got to tell you, I think Mandela Barnes becomes the nominee. Johnson's got another 6 years. But outstate, he's going to look like a superstar. You know what I'm saying? He's going to play. He's going to be the guy. Same way that I think we had a candidate for Congress in Paul Ryan's old district that was really big on cable news.
The Iron Stash.
Anyone locally would have told you this guy is a complete train wreck. He's an internet troll. No, don't do this. But it didn't. There's almost no way to talk people out of this. And I'm sure this is true in other places as well. I'm sure that there were Democrats in Kentucky who were saying, yeah, you probably don't want to dump a huge amount of money here. It's probably not going to happen. Doesn't make any difference. So I don't know. Changes the incentives
too. Exactly. The incentives is exactly right. And it's just worth mentioning. And think about this: if you're an out-of-state donor, right? Like, what is appealing to you, right? And versus what is appealing to the median voter in the state of Texas or Wisconsin, right? And so if you're Mandela Barnes and your email fundraising campaign is raising in tons of money when you're calling Kyle Rittenhouse a white nationalist or whatever, then there's this. I'm not saying that Mandela Barnes did that. I'm just making this a notional example, right? You can imagine what the digital director for the Beto campaign or for the Mandela Barnes campaign, might want to put, because they look at their metrics, right? They're like anybody else. Their incentives are driven by how much money did I bring in this month? Campaign managers on my back, right? So if I push the envelope and appeal to this more national progressive audience, it's going to pitch in $15. Why not do that? Why not try to push the envelope a little bit on the text message campaign, on the email campaign, etc. But then that stuff gets all, everybody sees that, right? It's not just the Hollywood liberals or the progressives all around the country who want to pitch in $5 or $10, for various campaigns that see it. Everybody sees it. And that moves the message of the whole campaign away from, what the median voter in their state wants. And so it does create a really bad, incentive structure that's hard to kind of break out from. You need a strong candidate that's able to say, guys, no, like we're not, we're gonna risk missing out on some of this low dollar money from out of state progressives in order to be best positioned for voters in the state.
And the kind of campaign the Republicans are going to run with Beto. They're going to say he wants to take away your guns, and everybody will say no, he doesn't want to take away your guns. And then they'll play that soundbite where Beto O'Rourke says, "Yes, I do think we ought to confiscate everybody's AR-15." Now, again, do not inundate us with comments like this is a good public policy. Charlie and Tim, you don't understand. We should go door to door and take away people's AR-15s because that would make fine. Just trust me, though, this is not going to play in Texas. If you want to be an elected official in Texas, actually calling for the literal confiscation of guns is not a winning issue. And I'm willing to die on that hill. Okay. Yeah, and if you have polling showing me, hey, gun confiscation ranks right up there in Texas, please share it with me.
By the way, I think maybe I'm wrong about this, and we got to test this theory out. But I think the Democratic electorate gets it. In a lot of places,
I think so,
in a place like Texas. And the Democratic electorate has demonstrated itself to be pragmatic time and again during the Trump era, and which is the opposite of what Republicans have had to deal with in their primary electorate, right? And so this notion that they have to run on the gun confiscation platform, I just don't think so. I just don't think that's right, particularly somebody like Beto, but anybody. I think that there's some leash from progressive voters that are saying, I'm, maybe my perfect platform is total gun confiscation, but I'm happy to vote for somebody who runs an ad where they're, showing off the fact that they like to hunt because they also support reasonable background checks and blah, blah, blah. I think a lot, not every Democratic voter, not everyone on Twitter, of course, but a plurality of Democratic voters I really do think get that and get that that have to be these kind of minor sacrifices in order to be practical. And it's the political class among the Democrats that sometimes doesn't seem to get it.
Okay, so we've climbed the ladder up to now the serious subjects because we are serious people. We have to talk about the variant. So Dr. Fauci was on was it CBS yesterday with Marge Brennan. What I thought was interesting is that Dr. Fauci's kind of all out of F's to give. Do you sort of get this sense? Let's play a couple of sound bites.
Senator Cruz told the Attorney General you should be prosecuted.
Yeah. I'd have to laugh at that. I should be prosecuted. What happened on January 6th, Senator?
Ooh. Do you think that this is about making you a scapegoat to deflect from President Trump?
Of course. You have to be asleep not to figure that one out.
Well, there are a lot of Republican senators taking aim at this. I mean,
that's okay. I'm just going to do my job, and I'm going to be saving lives, and they're going to be lying.
Jeez, he's just not holding back.
He's not. So can I have a bifurcated brain answer to the response to this, Charlie. On the one hand, I want to be like, yes, King. Yes, King. Thank you, Dr. Fauci. On the other hand, it's like, should maybe at this point, Dr. Fauci be a media personality, right? That's separate from the government. I do get some caution about this. Like at this point, I know right. And it's so hot. And I know that it shouldn't be like this, and I know this is unfair, and that we're babying these, these baby, Republican voters who are, refusing to get the jab to own the libs, and that we shouldn't have to, change the way we behave to accommodate their toddler-esque behavior. I understand that in a vacuum, but like, this is politics. This is government. You have to be the government for everybody. And is Dr. Fauci going out and doing these interviews, poking Ted and owning Ted Cruz, by the way, and owning Ted Cruz? Is that helping anybody who's not getting vaccinated get vaccinated, or who isn't getting the booster get the booster? I don't think so.
There's this phenomenon, though, that draws people of substance into the world of being a celebrity, a personality, and that's almost never a good thing. I mean, it's never a good, it does not enhance your credibility. And so he becomes just another figure in popular culture. Okay, so since I've been doing really intensive research over the last few minutes, hold on.
So you haven't been listening to my great takes during this podcast, Charlie? You've been, while I've been talking, you've been on the Google machine doing some intensive research? Okay, let's see how it is.
I'm trying to determine, let's see if this works. No, that's not going to work. I just see, it's Omicron. It's the Omicron variant.
Omicron.
Look, this is a big deal. We got to take it seriously. There's no question about it. On the other hand, the bottom line here is that we don't know a lot about it, including whether or not it's really makes people really seriously sick. And I'm looking at the front page of a major national newspaper that will go nameless. And I think there's a half dozen stories about all of this. It crashed the stock market on Friday. And we don't know the really crucial fact about this. So I wish we had the luxury of taking a deep breath and withholding judgment, but that's pretty naive, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I thought that Noah Smith, who's got a Substack, did a really good newsletter about this, where he sort of pointed out a few things that go against narratives on both sides. I think that, number one, you do have to take it seriously immediately, because if you looked at what happened with Delta, it really was, there was this moment of, should we take this seriously? Should we not? Like, what is this? We don't know. And like, by the time everybody realized, oh shit, this was a big thing, Delta had kind of already almost peaked, right? And so, it missed the window to act. That said, what does acting mean? And at this point, it's mostly boosters and vaccines. I think that the reality is that depending on what we know about this, there are unknowns. The appetite for distancing and shutdowns and all that stuff has dwindled to very little in most municipalities. It was not the case in Hawaii. Actually, Hawaii, I think, is unique, being an island that has been able to keep this out and has very, very low COVID numbers. But in most places, the appetite has dwindled, and so the response is, how can you use this to once again reinforce with people that you need to get vaccines, and how can we do that in a way that gets out of our political tribal fight?
How do you do it? I agree with you that's the challenge. But so today we wake up and I'm reading Axios, and they're talking about all of the Republican governors around the country that are using unemployment compensation as a way of bonding themselves to the anti-vaxxers, saying that if you lose your job because you refuse to take the vaccine, you are still eligible for unemployment compensation. So we're basically
enraging.
Some of these same governors who specifically were against paying bounties to get vaccinated, like Ron DeSantis, are now on board with paying people to not get the vaccine. So you would think this would be a moment where we would go, okay, let's put our differences aside. Let's do everything possible to protect ourselves from this. This is what we were warned against, that if we're not all vaccinated, this thing will mutate and everyone will be put at risk. But I don't sense any move on that. If anything, the folks at Fox News are becoming even more reckless. I mean, airing some stuff that I'm not even going to air the audio of it, because it would just, I think it would kill brain cells for me to have to listen to it.
Against benefits for people who lost their job because of the pandemic, against money for people to incentivize them to get the vaccine, for benefits for people who want to quit their job because they don't want to stop the pandemic. It is completely upside down. It is completely undesigned as a public policy matter. And it'd be one thing if, again, if you're just like, I'm a hardline fiscal conservative, it's none of this. It's all owning the libs all the way down. If I'm a hardline, I'm against unemployment benefits. Well, then, okay, you're against it across the board. You were against it during the pandemic. That was a stupid policy position to have, but that at least that's based in policy and principle. That's not what this is. And this is completely opposite of what we should be doing. And then you look at the comments from people, if you go into the dregs of conservative media and, you listen to the Ronnie Jacksons, the congressman who used to be the surgeon.
Who's actually a doctor.
He was a doctor, right? And they're like, the Democrats are making this up and they're going to give us boosters for the rest of our lives. And, this is all part of this plot. And it is just completely irresponsible. And I just have to keep thinking back. There was this one moment, for about 2 months back during the summer where, your National Review types, your responsible Republican types were like, Republicans are not anti-vax. It's just the Bulwark and the TDS people that are saying that Republicans are anti-vax. I mean, look, Ron DeSantis, he got the vaccine himself. Why? These guys aren't anti-vax. And since that moment, every opportunity to take the responsible pro-vaccine decision or the irresponsible trolling the libs decision, they've taken the irresponsible trolling the libs decision. And so it's no wonder that you have people out there, and this is why when I say try to get outside of the political binary, there's going to be some folks that are so lost, that brains have been so broken by this, that sadly they're never going to get these vaccines because they're so, everything in their life has become so politicized, and it's become so hardened that they won't consider it. But within these communities, there are other people who are just kind of going along with that, right? Because that's what is the norm in their in their conservative community, and those folks have to be able to be reached, and we have to go out, into foot. And this is why the Aaron Rodgers thing is so irresponsible.
So
so you got to go outside into sports and into country music and popular culture, and try to get to people that way. But because this is really never going to end if people never. That's the ironic thing about this. They're like, the Democrats never want this to end. It's like, no, they're trying to make it end. It really is never going to end if people don't get vaccinated.
That's what's so upside down, that there's no scenario in which the Democrats recover from where they're at right now that does not include getting a handle on the coronavirus, right? I mean, there's none. If we are in the midst of the next variant next fall, they're dead. So this is this weird upside down. You mentioned Aaron Rodgers, and of course that hits very close to home as a Green Bay Packer fan.
Yeah.
But where is the concerted pushback of the sort of the non or anti Aaron Rodgers? Why are we not being inundated with public service announcements from NBA stars, other more rational NFL players, Major League Baseball players, people from the popular culture? That should have happened last year, but it seems really urgent right now that somebody would say, okay, this is the moment in which we are going to push all of it, because that actually might influence some people.
We should get a psychologist on Thursday Night Bulwark or something to try to, because I'm sure there's a term for this, but my answer is I think it's fear of the people with the most radical views, right? Like fear of offending their little sensibilities, right? So if you're I'm trying to think of a good kind of representative, if you're like Nick Saban, right? And you're the coach of Alabama, and like, are you really going to go out there and do a pro-vaccine thing? I mean, I think last year, right when they first came out, some of these folks did this, but now that we've had this sort of 6 months of culture war, you're intentionally poking the finger in the eye, right? So you're scared. Whereas on the other side,
we're all hostage to the crazy.
Yeah. Well, if you're crazy, you don't give a shit what the normal people think, right? You're going to go out there and say, "I'm crazy. I'm an independent thinker. I'm not the man. I'm not a simp to the man." And so you're going to keep doing it. I think that is what explains it. I'm sure there's a psychological term for this, but that's
why they're reluctant to do it. But it's not a sufficient reason for them not to do it anyway.
Right.
With people dying. Hey, before we end here, I got to give you a shout out to your Not My Party that came out over the weekend, that if people took a break from social media, they might not have seen it, because you did something kind of radical. You actually said what I stand for, not what you, well, you do say what you hate, but also what you stand for. What is your thing with Taylor Swift, by the way?
Oh, I just wanted to pick on her. I feel like everybody's on Team Taylor. She comes out with this 10-minute video song attacking Jake Gyllenhaal, and I love Jake. Jake was with the gays. Brokeback Mountain was revolutionary. I mean, like they were not big movie stars.
He was mean to Taylor.
Big movies. Was he though? It was 10 years ago. I mean, that's kind of crazy. And if you come out and do a song about an ex from 10 years prior, that you guys dated for 3 months, and that's kind of crazy. That's kind of crazy behavior, I think. Okay, anyway, that's just my view. I'm Team Jake.
But other than that, that one lapse in your judgment and taste. You talk about what you stand for, and I mentioned right before the podcast, I was surprised and very much impressed. Speaking of like going up against maybe what the culture would expect from you, you made it very clear that you are still quite pro-life and are very explicit about it in this video.
Yeah, well, look, just for context, I'll get to that in 1 second. Just for context, I have been getting messages. So the audience on Snapchat is different than the Bulwark audience, which is why it's cool. It's mostly younger folks. It's overwhelmingly people under 25, and so they're a little less jaded by our all of our different political a little less dug in the trenches on their political side. Particularly, I think people that are drawn to Not My Party are more, sort of politically kind of figuring their way. And the piece of negative feed, and just one fun aside, I just want to brag for a second. The video before this, the Kyle Rittenhouse video.
Oh yeah,
2.5 million people watched that, and that's not just like one click, but it was about a third of them made it all the way to the end. So almost 1 million people watched the whole thing. 2.5 million watched a little bit of it, which is really amazing. And I think cool for that we're kind of reaching this sort of middle audience of younger folks. But anyway, the piece of feedback I get the most is you're a soy boy. And I hate you from MAGA teens. But the number 2 piece of feedback I get from good faith teens is that I every week I'm like, oh, Trump's crazy, the far left's crazy, Tucker Carlson's an asshole, and I do less of, well, what do you think we should be doing? Like, what are you for? And so I want to take the holiday week to do that, and to kind of chart a different, something that hopefully would resonate with some of those kids who also feel like, maybe the Democratic Party, particularly on campus, that the kind of lefty Democratic Party on campus might be, they sense not welcoming to them, and that they're sure as shit not Trumpers. Well, what are they? What can they be for? And so I kind of walked through a list of things, and one of them was being pro-life, and that talks about being pro-life, yes, for fetuses and for kids inside the womb, and making sure that there are protections for them, but also making sure there are protections for mothers, making sure there are protections for refugees, making sure there are protections for immigrants, protections for people, obviously people who don't want to contract the goddamn novel coronavirus that have killed 800,000 people. Right, that pro-life is broader than just abortion, but I didn't want to shy away from it, and I hopefully really. What I hope is that there are at least some young folks out there who are watching who also feel that way, right? Who maybe they come from religious backgrounds and they're like, or religious families, or not. You don't have to be religious to be pro-life, but maybe they do come from a religious family and they're like, I don't like Donald Trump. Everyone around me is a Republican. I get these kind of messages. Everyone around me has gone full on MAGA, and I'm still pro-life, and I still believe in some of these values I was taught as a kid. But like these people have all gone crazy. Where is a home for me? And so I was hoping that I could kind of speak out to them.
Well, and you did, and it's really excellent. If people have not seen your video on Kyle Rittenhouse, it's also probably I think the most comprehensive, even-handed approach, even though it's very, very entertaining. But that's not
even-handed and entertaining.
Well, I want to stress that there's no moral obligation to be dull in these sorts of things, and simply because something is entertaining does not mean that it's not also quite substantive. And you ask the question, who is Kyle Rittenhouse? You have MAGA worlds making him into a hero. You have the usual folks who are saying that he's a symbol of hate, and maybe he's just an idiot teenager. Maybe there's a little bit of, it's complicated. And generally in social media in particular, complicated and nuance don't survive very long. So these are great contributions. So congratulations, Tim. Really, very good.
Thank you, man. It's been really fun to do them. I'm glad people are watching them. And if you've got a teen out there, in your life, you're seeing over Christmas, tell them to tune in. I need more teens.
I think that's an excellent idea. So, Tim, thanks for coming on the podcast, especially the first day that you're back or just fresh back from Hawaii. So thanks for coming on this morning.
Thanks, Charlie. Mahalo.
And thank you all for listening to today's Bulwark Podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. We'll be back tomorrow, and we'll do this all over again.